The animal rights movement is arguably the most altruistic movement which doesn't really compare with any other social justice movement. There are many similarities between the two, but normally a movement seeks to gain privilege. A social movement, justice, seeks to gain privileges for a precise group of people, like the civil rights movement or the gay rights movement or the feminist movement. They want to be included in the society. The same, in a sense, oppressed people want to be accepted as equals into society, while the movement to free animals must fight for exclusion. Oppressed animals don't want to be part of the society. They want to cease to be used. They want we want them to cease to exist, to be born, to exist for our use. So we face greater challenges working to free animals. We face so much economic pressure against our movement, and we overall have little support. So sometimes it's hard to get our act together. Throughout the years I've been involved in the animal rights movement, I've been through different phases and cycles, and I'm sure I'll keep changing. My own personal story follows a pattern that I'm certain many of you can have experienced. In my first phase, for instance, I was highly motivated to educate the poor meat eater or the non-vegan who doesn't get it. This was a phase where I was open to most ideas, and where the motto could have been "do anything but do something," and where the punchline would have been "go vegan." I'd be present at pretty much any event, and I wouldn't understand why people would stay home instead of coming out. This was a phase also where I would get highly influenced by others, and I was busy forming my own opinions. This is incidentally the period where I arrived in Toronto with my husband. It was in 2008. Both of us were brand new, clumsy vegans, and I had a sense that there was more to do to help animals than going vegan and buy cruelty-free products. So that's why I started to look for opportunities to get involved. And it was not hard because Toronto is pretty active with regards to animal rights. So it was not long before I attended my first fur protest, which was quite exciting, I thought. I thought it was pretty neat and very empowering to attend demos. You know, with a poster, "Fur is murder," I was convinced that I could change people's minds. But looking back now, I realize that I might have lacked judgment at times. I wouldn't be too shy to get into meat eaters' face and dump on them lots of information that they didn't necessarily want to hear. But I was so eager to convey the message, the urgency of the message that torturing, killing, and consuming animals had to be stopped. But it's also during this period that productive actions were hosted with various activists, namely, Ian, you might remember, this pretty big protest there was a big protest during the vivisection conference.
Oh yes.
That was good. And there was also different eye-catching demos that I worked with other people. So these are good memories as far as I'm concerned. However, it didn't didn't last because over time, another phase materialized where frustration grew. Because what you see, you hear, or experience becomes more acute. Everywhere we turn in society, we are reminded constantly that, we live in a violent and cruel society. So in this phase, the suffering of animals is absolutely overwhelming. Each image and video you try to watch grows harder to look at. Basically, you don't get used to animal suffering. You really don't. When you see or smell meat, eggs, or milk, you don't only think of the murder of the animal. You can see the process, all the process that leads to the murder. And when you see a brand like Clorox or CoverGirl, you don't see, you see more than the brand. You can visualize the animals being tested on. And the same goes for fur trim. Each and every fur trim is a catastrophe in itself. And it is a catastrophic trend that has exploded over the last 5 years. So I started to feel that it's not going to get any better and there's nothing to be done to change animal suffering. I also started to question the assumption that educating the public about what happens to animals could not necessarily motivate anyone to change their consumption habits. I would think, well, there is something doesn't work. Maybe it's because there's something wrong with the way we convey the message. Maybe we have to spare the meat eater, because, and besides, you don't want the meat eater to hate vegans and activists. So I think often we consider ourselves as being outside of the society. We consider ourselves as the outsiders, I think. And as such, we sometimes I feel like we try to spare the non-vegans, and we don't want to shock him too much. We don't want to hammer him with violent arguments in favor of veganism. And but there's also another factor that I realized could be quite debilitating in the movement, which is being let down by other activists. When people around you burn out or don't show up, I think it has an effect on you. After being around for a while, I could see that people come and go in the movement all the time. People you start to like working with fade away or disappear, and this is disappointing. So this is a good reminder for all of us that that our actions can have an effect on others. So after that, maybe after 3 years or something like that, I started to go through a period where I was hurt and angry most of the time. I was hurt and angry on behalf of animals, of course, not on behalf of myself. Especially the day a friend showed up flashing her new fur-trimmed coat. I think it was cat or dog fur, I'm pretty sure of that. And this person knew about what was going on in the fur industry. She knew, and yet she chose to buy this horror. So the public resistance at that point hit hard. And it's even harder when it comes from people close to you. So really, the poster "Fur is Murder" didn't work anymore for me. For me, it was ineffective. But I didn't want to engage with non-vegans, and I felt it was a waste of time to educate the public. I thought, well, most know about, or they have a good idea of what's implied in their food and the items they buy, and yet they choose they don't change, they choose to buy that stuff. The endless public resistance to our message can be a great source of distress. When I went through this period of anger and feeling of hopelessness, helplessness, and even cynicism, I had to take some time off, basically. I had to think for myself. I had to wonder, okay, is there another direction I can go? And incidentally, that's funny because it's during that period that I started to be a caretaker for a feral cat colony. And this was part of my rehabilitation, probably because you help directly. You know who you're helping, you know where your actions go, and to me this is the most meaningful type of activism. I guess Brenda could talk about that later, I don't know. But yeah, so anyways, after about over a year ago, I would say, I guess what gave me new hope was discovering the meat abolition movement. The hardest thing for me is to come to the realization that I can only stand beside my brothers and sisters, the animals, and I cannot do anything. You see trucks, go by, you see truckloads of animals go by, you see animals in pet shops and so on and so on. You cannot do anything because remember, it is illegal to prevent torture and murder currently. And after reading about the meat abolition movement, I came to the conclusion that without changes in law, humans will never make peace with animals. The world will never go vegan unless it becomes illegal to torture and murder our animals. Because it's essentially not in humans' nature nor in the society's nature to voluntarily give up exploiting animals. I might cut a little because I find I have too much stuff here.
You have about 5 minutes.
Okay, well basically this movement ignited my interest because it finally treats the problem of animal exploitation as a social justice issue and not as an individual choice to go vegan. So abolishing the consumption of meat and all other uses of animals by law, as I see it now, right now, is the only way to rescue individuals from human tyranny. This is essentially where I stand today, and we'll see where it takes me. Also, the project, the March to Close Down All Slaughterhouses, is a way to engage hundreds of people, and the way people can take ownership in such an event is really powerful, and it makes a goal more tangible, I find. So by finding a niche or a project or an area that we are passionate about, we can avoid down periods and even burnout that threatens all of us in this movement. All the things that I've talked about, the fact that people come and go at a fast pace, the endless animal suffering, the massive public resistance to our message, and being let down by other activists, can lead to despair and exhaustion. We start full of energy. We picture huge crowds of protesters at every single demo and protest. We think that reason and compassion will win over injustice, but at some point, the reality sinks in, and we can feel that our efforts are absolutely useless. We can feel that. I'm not saying it is. We can feel that. But by focusing our energy and talents to something that we are comfortable with and we find meaningful, we can avoid being overwhelmed and becoming weary. The reality is that even if I could work full-time to achieve animal liberation, there would be no guarantee of success. All we know, we all know that how great are the challenges and obstacles in our way. But as someone said, don't worry about being successful, just be faithful. And I think this applies wonderfully well to animal rights activism. No matter how hard we work, there is no guarantee of success. But if we are faithful, we cannot fail, right? And also, we have to realize that working for less violent society, to build a less violent society, to work for peace and justice is really a long time commitment. That's it.
So, Brenda?
Hi, my name is Brenda Bronfman. I'm the founder of the Wishing Well Sanctuary, which is just north of Toronto, for some of you who don't know. Hopefully you will all at one point come and visit our animal family. I just give a little background on myself. I've always been what I consider to be a lover of animals, very sensitive, and I used to even collect rocks that I thought that looked a bit lonely or something, and they just spoke to me. But I've always felt a little bit like I've connected with. I believe in the fact that we're all connected, that somehow between people and animals and the environment, there is energy among all of us, and that we are connected. What we do to ourselves, what we do to each other and to the land is going to impact all of us. As I became more aware of the issues and just seeing the animals in the trucks and how painful and just it was devastating. I would cry every time I saw one of the transport trucks, and I still sometimes find it can be very overwhelming. Just the numbers are just so vast. It's difficult to get, for me anyway, to get my mind around, billions per annum. At the sanctuary, we have 51 animals. Well, it's fantastic for those 51 animals. It's wonderful for us, of course, and for all the children and the adults that come to visit. But it's, an infinitesimal drop in the bucket compared to really the animals that need help. And I'm keenly aware of that. Even if we were double the size and had triple the funds, so we'd have 100 or 200 animals. It's still really nothing. And so that's why I strongly believe in the fact of education. And so part of our mandate at the sanctuary is to have humane education. We want to grow more and more of those programs because, like it or not, we really need people. It's people that are going to affect the change. And while it's tempting, I know that there are many times in the past I have felt so ashamed at being human, and I have apologized to animals on behalf of the human species. I think it's important. There's a few things that are important. One is to remember that there are people like us and more out there, and to focus not only on what we can't do and who is not responding, but to the like-minded, like-spirited people that we need. We need community. That's clear. I know that over times when I have felt either overwhelmed, I've struggled with depression and anxiety from time to time over the course of my life. That I would tend to isolate, and which of course is the worst thing in the world to do. We need each other, and my depression had led me really to think about what could I do because it's not constant obviously, but it's a little bit of a current that's always threatening to come. And what can I do that is meaningful to me, that what I feel passionately about, which of course is animal protection. I also happen to really love kids and I believe strongly in education. And I've been to the abattoirs, I've read a lot, I've seen a lot of videos, each one more painful than the next. And thank God there are many of you who are doing what you do and are standing and bearing witness and looking at and seeing the eyes of these magnificent souls that, have, I was writing some notes and I thought, they have no voice and they have no choice. And I've wondered over the course of my life, why do I feel so strongly about animals? What is it? Of course, there's a lot of good reasons to do so, but I wondered, how much of is it that certain things resonate within me, and then perhaps also within others? So, do I recognize in their eyes feelings of helplessness, that they don't have a choice in life? They are being, whether it's an animal that's being transported to the slaughterhouse, or a rabbit whose eyes are, animals that are being used for cosmetic and product testing, and any of the animals, they don't have a choice. And I recognize that feeling from somewhere deep within. I don't know if it's from my childhood, I don't know if it's from a past life, but there's something about that I can feel it. And so it reaffirms my strong desire to make a difference. I've always wanted to make a difference. I grew up with relative wealth. All of us do, being in Canada, as compared to other parts of the world. But I knew very early on that I was really blessed and lucky, and a lot of people weren't so fortunate. And so it became important to me at an early age to want to make a difference and to make a positive difference in this world. And I recognize that what I'm doing at the sanctuary, and I say I just because I founded it, but it's a whole team effort to make it go and make it grow and make it what it is. We all need a multi-pronged approach for such a vast problem, and as you said, it's a social justice issue, and it's so enormous that we need, I think, everybody. So while I can think, oh my God, what am I doing? It's just, I have this little property with a few animals and we're educating a few kids. There's just so much more to be done. And really, as we're sitting here right now, animals are suffering. Every second, every moment, it doesn't stop. And then it's easy to go into a vortex of, oh God, this is horrible, and I can feel my energy just get sucked down. And I remember at those times that I've worked hard at thinking about how what I want is to raise the energy. I want to be a part of having a higher energy and adding to the universe, not depleting it. And so my own feelings of horror and overwhelm and pain really deplete and are counterintuitive to what I'm hoping to achieve. So that actually does help, as well as thinking about sending out prayers and light around those trucks or anywhere. We can't see every animal that's suffering, but we know they are out there, and we've seen pictures of them. And to say, maybe this is at least the end of the horrible suffering that you've endured since the time you were born. God bless you, and hopefully next time around, it'll be better. And I'm sorry. We can't do something for everyone at all times, clearly. Or, here we are talking about burnout. I guess everyone has a different chemistry, a different way of living, a different way of thinking, and some people are more resilient than others naturally. I think that we can learn resilience and we can learn tools to become more resilient, but it's, I think most of us, the people that I've met that are interested in animal protection and feel very strongly about these issues, are sensitive and maybe aren't able to sort of let things roll off. We don't let things roll off our backs. We actually absorb stuff and really feel it strongly and passionately, which on the positive end can make for a very powerful movement. The downside, of course, is that we crash and burn, and then of course we're no good to anybody. We're not accomplishing anything. So I think that what do I think? I think that I'm thrilled. I mean, the timing of this evening was very interesting. I did want to, before I forget, the Wishing Well Sanctuary is hosting a workshop actually on this very topic. We're bringing in a facilitator to deal. It's called the cost of caring, compassion fatigue, and that's on May 3rd. And it's going to be a full day, experiential. She'll be giving us tools, and we'll get into groups, I guess, and no one will have to say anything if they don't want to, of course. But I think a lot of people have come up to the sanctuary and have said, oh God, I just needed to be at a sanctuary where we can see healthy and happy animals in a lovely environment, because it's so painful to constantly see the suffering and the horror that we endure. And that's why I thought, oh great, I think part of our mandate at the sanctuary is to help inform and to help people heal, and in any number of ways. And we, as I said, we need each other, and we need, I think, a kind of a constant infusion of good energy, of tools, of caring and compassion among each other. I know that sometimes there are issues among, like any group, people are people are people, and of course some people have different views about things, whether it's welfare versus rights, whether it's, there's this way to do that, or there's that way, and my way is right and yours isn't. I think that that's really counterproductive. I think that can be very painful for people, and there's a continuum. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you, but I used to be a big meat eater. It was a continuum. As I became more aware of the issues, as I learned about animals raised for food, I became horrified, and naturally I stopped eating. And the more I learned, the more my own behaviors and my own choices changed. And I think for all of us that is empowering, that we're living in our integrity. I mean, I certainly couldn't look at, Alistair, who's one of our steer, or any of the animals, look at them in their eyes and give them a hug if I was eating their brethren, like I just couldn't, obviously. And I think it feels good to know that our actions are aligned with our deep beliefs and our philosophy of life and living. We cannot control other people, much as we would like to. It's hard enough controlling ourselves, I think, sometimes. But what we can do is look at our own lives, and one step at a time. I mean, I constantly have to tell myself I can't think about billions and feel, and right now, again, I mean, how many animals have died since I last said right now and right now, or are suffering, or left out, or being beaten, or abused, or anything. I can't do something about all of that. I wish I could. So what I need to do, and I think that, in sharing with people, we say, what can we do? And focus on, okay, this is what I can do. This is my little piece of what I can do to make a difference, hopefully, and have that grow over time. And as I learn more, and as I meet more people, and as we band together, more and more, I think we will become more and more effective. It can feel like we're not going to get anywhere. I think people don't like change, including us. Not just meat eaters who don't like to change. There's a lot of, it's hard to change, and it's hard to look deep into our own eyes, look into the mirror, and say, gee, I'm not sure I really like what I see. We don't want to. But I do think that when we get up in the morning and know that we are, whatever little bit we can do, it's one little bit more than was done before we attempted that, before we did it. And none of us are acting alone. So I want to, reaffirm that. I mean, I feel honored and thrilled. I've met so many wonderful people since founding the sanctuary, and it has really enriched my life. And I hope that will better enable me to do even more. Because I believe that as we feel stronger inside, we're more capable, of course, of doing more. So I'm sorry, I was thinking about the topic and, what do we do to cope with some of those things? I mean, I do meditation, sometimes more successfully than others. My mind has a tendency to whir and twirl and do all kinds of calisthenics. Go for walks, play with my dogs, play with the sheep, the cat, just connect with another soul that I could feel. I feel love for and from. And I've tried the other routes, whether it was drugs or alcohol, eating, just not paying attention, whatever, numbing out in one way or another. And none of those ways really are very effective. I mean, they work in the moment, in the short term, but as an activist and as somebody who wants to make a difference in the world, we got to be sharp. We want to be on the ball. We need to know what's going on. And as painful as it is, we can feel good about the fact that we are confronting things. And again, we're doing it not necessarily literally holding hands, but metaphorically, figuratively holding hands. That makes all the world of difference to me. And so I thank you all for being here, and that's kind of my bit.
So I wanted to focus on things you can do to avoid or bypass burnout. In my own experience, I was more depressed before Being Safe started, and before doing the weekly vigils. And so I've been doing 3 vigils per week since July 2011, so that's 2.5 years. So I've witnessed a lot, but I am less depressed than I was before. In fact, I feel more empowered and I see changes happening. So I just wanted to sort of present this other side about the problem of under-witnessing rather than over-witnessing. In fact, I feel bad not being there when the trucks are going by. Sometimes I walk my dog. When there isn't a vigil and I see trucks going by and I run up and I just try to witness by myself. And I feel sad that those trucks are going by and there's no witnesses that care. They're extending care and love. So first of all, I wanted to ask you, what does it feel like to be burnt out and what are its sources? So just some of the feelings. Just give me some examples of feelings that you feel that you think are associated with burnout.
Sadness.
Okay. Helplessness, sadness, exhaustion,
Overwhelming of not being able to do more.
so like ineffectiveness or not.
Yes, effectiveness, thank you.
Anything else?
Caring less.
Caring less?
Starting to care less.
Yeah.
Hopelessness, a lot of fear,
Fear.
just the implications of what's happening and like for the animals.
Okay, anyone else?
Anger, a lot of anger at the rest of the world.
Okay, rage. Brenda. Okay, anything else?
There's also inaction, like you stop doing what it is you actually want to do.
Right.
And then you feel guilty because you're not doing it.
Right.
Okay,
That's
you're tired, yeah.
Anything else? Okay, some other ones I came up with, I guess you said scared, worried, I don't know if you said depressed, tired, fed up, judgmental, hateful, violent. So what do you think some of the sources are? I know it's a complex question, but just some examples of what you think are the reasons for feeling burnt out.
Helplessness. Helplessness.
Not seeing change fast enough.
Yeah.
And also feeling like I'm not, and also like feeling angry at myself for not being able to do more, and like just thinking that like if I actually like wanted to do something meaningful, like I should be opening the trucks and letting the animals go, and just feeling kind of angry at myself for not doing that or refusing to do that.
So being ineffective, not doing enough at the moment. So there's injustice in front of you, not doing enough. Okay, so feeling alone, which is an internal thing, and you talked about some external factors like being ineffective. I think other internal ones, that the sources within you and that you can control, is arguing with others, and then also arguing amongst ourselves, sort of infighting. So you actually have a lot of power to control some things. And then the next question I have for you guys is, what is the opposite of getting burnt out, and how can you feel empowered instead?
What was the second part, Anita?
And how can you feel empowered instead?
Showing your love for the animals by showing your love to others.
Okay, so the opposite of feeling burnt out is when you're actually showing love to animals.
You're going the positive route.
Anyone else?
Connecting with others who feel the same, other activists.
So community, like Carolyn said earlier, community is a big factor. Going to the vigils, and even though as sad as they are, is still empowering because we are as a group together, and that's very empowering to me at least.
Doing the same actions, but changing how meaningful the outcome is. So if you do the action of being at the vigil and you're burnt out because you think you can't help the pigs, maybe that's the wrong outcome you had in the first place because you never could have. But if the outcome is, did I have an effect on another human being? Did I somehow even change one other person? Then that can be very meaningful and inspiring outcome.
There's so many levels of effectiveness, different ways to think of it, yeah. Okay, so feelings are like you're actually helping others, whether it's the animals, offering comfort, offering them watermelon, helping other activists. Some people, I mean, we're talking about this Michael yesterday, I guess, about how some activists go to vigils to help other activists build community. I mean, I was so impressed when Pia's not here, Pia Stein said to me, one of the biggest reasons she goes to vigils is just to support other activists. I just thought that was very impressive. And Michael does that too. He carpools activists from all over. So it's building community. The feeling of being empowered is something that's not associated with burnt up. It's sort of the opposite, you know. And as you mentioned, being part of the community. So, what do you think are the sources of these feelings of being empowered and being effective, as opposed to burnout? So, what do you think are some of the sources?
I think having a project, like something that has a beginning, middle, and end, you just really focus on it with it. That's interesting.
Achievable goals.
Okay, anyone else?
In my own little world on Facebook, I have noticed that there are people that are responding in their own way by posting proactive or animal issues that it never, in the whole time I've been friends with them, have ever shown that before. So I know that my little seeds are planted and they are growing slowly, but it is, so that's my way of dealing with it too, that I don't discontinue, I continue that because I know I see the effect. That's somewhat of a conclusion for me.
So you're planting seeds
And they're growing, yeah.
Okay. Anyone else?
I think it's the importance of increments. Like if you just look at the importance of achieving something, this larger goal, then it's very frustrating. If you recognize that those increments, whether it's somebody or what I call the gateway animal issues, like dolphins, I consider that. I work in about addictions, so it's not gateway, but dolphins are a gateway, to something else, and that's valid.
Okay, so thanks a lot. I'll just I'll talk about some of the sources, and my talk today is informed by Tolstoy mainly, so I'll draw a lot on him. So with respect to sources, doing what is right in the present, so every moment. So that's something that's very empowering. And a couple of people mentioned here the frustration, I think Carolyn and others, that you're not freeing the animals. And if we feel pain and burnout, it's partly because of that, because we're not doing what's right. If you were in the truck and full of other people in the truck, and there were people bearing witness, they go have some water, and saying, "Oh, we love you, I'm sorry," and you're about to go to the death camp. I mean, it's not very impressive. And you demand much more, and you have every right to demand to be completely free. So it's pretty lame, to tell you the truth, and I certainly felt that at the Golden Pig State Vigil this week. I was thinking, because there it's more immediate. The slaughterhouse is right there, and you can hear the screaming, and it felt pretty lame. And plus, there's no public there to offset that feeling where you're actually giving leaflets and converting people. So there is this problem, and it has to do with a philosophical issue or approach. One is called deontological, which is you do what's right in the present every single moment of your life. You're like Jesus, you're like Buddha, you're like Tolstoy, you're like Gandhi. Whatever the consequences. If you're dragged away to jail for that, fine. If you're, nailed to the cross, fine. You know, you're a martyr, you're not a tyrant, you're not a bystander. You do what's right every second. What we're doing is called the utilitarian approach, and there's a lot of problems with this kind of philosophical approach because you assume that you're so smart that you can figure out what the consequences are. So you're saying, I'm doing this, I want to go to jail now, I'm doing this because there's a greater good associated with it, but how do you know that? Sometimes you're more effective by being a Jesus or a Buddha or just doing what's right in the present all the time. If we all did that, maybe social change would happen faster. Yes, there would be some martyrs, but maybe people would see this is absolutely wrong and we should just be giving water or saying I'm sorry as a death truck is going to a slaughterhouse. So that just I'm just giving you some of these paradoxes and inconsistencies. But so doing what is right, when you do that, there is absolute empowerment. Even if you're a martyr, even if you sacrifice and suffer for it. And so, and that's an internal thing, and you're acting on your conscience, you're bearing witness, which is the right thing to do, but bearing witness in the fullest sense of helping. So when the Chinese activists liberate all the dogs in the truck, that's an example of really fully bearing witness. What we do is only partially bearing witness. But on the other hand, we are doing things like we're challenging what's called the distancing effect. In globalization, corporate globalization, there's this process called distancing. So you support child labor without knowing it because it's so distant and the different components are built in different parts. And so what we're doing with bearing witness is we're stopping that distancing effect. So you go to the supermarket, you see some packaged meat. Well, what we do with our vigils is we see the individuals before us, and we totally break that distancing effect. So that's something very invaluable. Another source of feeling completely empowered is using a love-based approach to social change. And I can't emphasize this enough, how important it is. And I recommend for all of you to read like Gandhi, King, Martin Luther King, Cesar Chavez, all the great community organizers that have used a nonviolent, positive, love-based approach. Social change happens, I believe, faster if you use kindness and love towards all, including slaughterhouse workers, owners, managers, mediators, whoever it is. Love and kindness works faster. And this has been depicted in literature, like someone like Charles Dickens. One of his books was David Copperfield. It was the most autobiographical book. And in it he has two teachers, one that used corporal punishment, and where he didn't learn a thing, and another teacher that treated everyone like equals and treated the students as absolute equals, and that's where he flourished. But I think this is just a general principle. It's how we learn. We're more likely to learn if we're treated with respect and love and kindness. Another source is just effective action. So that might mean increasing awareness, converting people to vegan. Today at our vigil, I think there were 6 of us, and one driver said, they went veg because of our vigils. And we've heard that many times. Just because we're there all the time, people begin to make the connection, they get some literature, we're planting seeds, some of them are converting. Another one, effective action is getting other people to join, so new people to join, and that's what we're finding with the vigils. It's because we use a community organizing approach. We're out there every week, 3 times a week, and other successful social movements have done this. Cesar Chavez, who started the United Farm Workers, when he first started, there was nobody who came to the meetings. He was really frustrated. There might be 1 or 2 people, and so he had to use it. What's in social movement theory is called selective incentives. So like parties, dances, food. You would go knocking door to door, that's another technique. You knock on doors, you meet people face to face, meet them in their homes. Then ask one of the people in the homes to organize their neighborhood and bring people out. So we use all these techniques. And also there's activism post-vigil. And I think we talked about this as well, Michael, yesterday, about speaking out more, organizing other, meeting for a coffee afterwards, or having dinner, just getting people to get to know each other is one way. So building community, meeting other people. I think another source of empowerment is meeting other people with lofty morals like altruism, kindness, compassion, selflessness, and at vigil supporting activists. Whether it's with hugs, when people are crying, or food. I mean, someone like Agnes often brings food for all of us. rides and carpools, and you know, some people have said it's going to vigils is better than going to church. I'll second that.
Who said that?
A lot of several people. I'd agree. Tolstoy on action. So I just wanted to say a couple of things. So there's one thing, thinking, you know, having thoughts and saying all are equal, animals are equal to us, and I'm vegan as a result. But there's a difference between just thinking and acting. And Tolstoy wrote many nonfiction books that are philosophical and very, very powerful. And one of them was called What I Believe, or alternatively, it's called My Religion. And it was published after he wrote At Confession, which at around the age of 50, he was suicidal. And he just thought life was a senseless joke, and what's the point of living, and you know, there's just so much injustice, and what's my life, and you know, if I die, who would I care anyways, right? And what's the use of my present and future actions? So he had all these questions. So he said, above all, in his book My Religion, do not have recourse to violence. And he said Jesus' practice is easy. He said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So Jesus had these, just to clarify, he didn't believe in resurrection. He just believed Jesus was a man with some good ideas, as was Buddha, as were other figures. But what he wanted to point out is Jesus had really high standards, moral standards, like turning the other cheek, just you know, very helping the poor, getting rid of all his wealth, not having property, and so forth. And yet he said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And so this is sort of a counter argument to this whole panel here. Like, it's not about burnout. Actually, you can be Jesus-like and you can say that line, right? And so Tolstoy says of his own life, I was taught to judge and inflict punishment. In fact, he played a role on it. He was a judge for a short time. And he goes, but then he sort of challenges all that. He goes, the command, resist not evil, is the central point of Jesus' doctrine. What he means by that is like violent resisting. So in Tolstoy's The Kingdom of God is within you, he talks about turning the other cheek, using love and kindness, and always nonviolence. And he said, as Jesus said, he came here to save people rather than judge them. And in our approach when we go to the slaughterhouses, if you keep that in your mind, because it's very easy to get angry at slaughterhouse workers and owners and managers, very, very easy, or meat eaters. But if you come with this totally different perspective, that you're coming here to save them and not judge them, and who are you to judge? I mean, if you live in a glass house, don't throw stones. With respect to the distancing effect, Tolstoy writes about military administrative machinery which divides responsibility, so no one's responsible or accountable. So, you know, you can murder in war, but there's no accountability or, you know, responsibility. Whereas you would never do that kind of thing in a domestic scene. So he goes, how is that possible? And he talks about this division in administrative machinery. In a confession, as I said, he asks questions like, what will come of what I do today and tomorrow? What is the meaning of life beyond space and time, and the relation between the finite and infinite? And how am I to live? So that's always in all his books. And he goes, this was the answer he provides in a confession towards the end in chapter 11. He says, I erred not so much what I thought, but how I lived. So he was a man who was always struggling with this issue, how I lived. And he was pretty moral, but he was also very immoral, as was typical of his class. You know, so he was involved in all sorts of debauchery and possibly rape, you know, of peasant women, you know, all sorts of things that he was involved in. But he was also very good. Like, he set up schools for the serfs and so forth. Yet he was still really struggling by the age of 50. And then he had a complete transformation. He actually got rid of his property. He went vegetarian. He stopped sports hunting. He just had a complete transformation. He started to dress like the peasants. He started to work on the land. So he cleaned. He didn't believe in having servants. It was a complete transformation. And he started, in other words, he was acting different. He wasn't just professing these ideas. And for all of us, Like, I know personally I'm acting different since Toronto Pig Safe started. Like, that's actually my priority in life, and I'm spending a lot of time doing it, and I've never been happier. You know, and I'm not focusing on other goals, which I could have been focusing on. So he says desperation arises from not seeing the changes you want to see. It arises from not acting and living the way you ought to. In his book, My Religion, he also says, I recognize my fellowship with the whole world. There is truth only in action. By introducing light into the conscience of everyone, that is our life work. Truth and love will live forever. So his answer to that question about, what's the purpose of, what should I do today and tomorrow? Why does it matter? Well, the only thing that lives after you die is truth and love, and the way you've contributed to those things. Nothing else matters. So in terms of process, so I talked about, goals. In terms of, how much time do I have left? I'll stop, sorry.
No. Like, why don't you just make a
Okay.
summary? That would be nice, just to tie a bow on it, Anita.
Okay. So in terms of process, he advocated a love-based approach in what I believe, or my religion. And he said, God said, do no evil, and evil will cease to exist. Because we sometimes have debates about tactics, and so it's okay to be mean to a mediator because an evil does not cancel out another evil. It simply does not. So actually, I do have So he was very clear on this. He said, and he goes, was it really that simple? Is it really so simple? He goes, the advance of humanity towards righteousness is due not to the tyrants, but to the martyrs, as fire cannot extinguish fire, so evil cannot suppress evil. Good alone, confronting evil and resisting its contagion, can overcome evil. It is not violence, but good that overcomes evil. And the true source of happiness is fellowship and love. I cannot separate myself from others, and that was a theme that we talked about as community. And quote, I believe now that my true welfare and that of others is only possible when I labor not for myself, but for another. So it's like service to others. That's your purpose in life. That's the purpose of everyone's life. It's not about me or helping myself. It's about service to others. But for another, and that I must not refuse to labor for another, but give with joy that of which he has need. This faith has changed my estimate of what is right and important, and wrong and despicable. So in other words, the key is to live for others and to do it with joy, and to give with joy those who have need. And also, what he defines love as being able to love someone and not expecting anything in return. And so that's a type of unconditional love, which many of us may have been lucky enough to experience with parents, or So I think that's a very important form of just to try to think about in our approach. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
When Ian asked if I would take part in this, I thought what I could do mostly is not talk for 15 minutes, but just say that I can contribute in the form of later on when you're asking questions. I can probably answer a lot of your questions. I will say that I won't be answering them scientifically. I've been a frontline activist for over a decade now. Factory farms, fur farms, you name it. Sea shepherd. I've been to a lot of places where I've had a lot of adrenaline and heartache, so I can give a lot of subjective advice, and hopefully it'll be helpful to you. And that's how I see I can be the most useful here. I did take a few notes, and actually something we haven't touched on yet, which I can speak to, is the physiological aspects of trauma. Oh, I should say that I was diagnosed with PTSD a few years ago because I had spent so much time on the front lines, and so I do have firsthand experience with being diagnosed and slowly recovering from that and becoming a much happier person. And I can tell you what that process was like. But physiologically, we haven't talked about that yet. And when we're talking about trauma, it's what's going on up here. But what's going on up here really affects our bodies. But we don't really think about that. We often ignore what our bodies are telling us. What everyone here in this room knows is that there's an emergency happening 24/7 around the globe with animals. And we live with that, and we carry that, and that produces adrenaline. and it produces, we get the shakes, we end up with irritable bowel syndrome and all sorts of things. And so something that I had to learn was to listen to my body and to see that when I was becoming in a like fight or flight, that's often how physiologically we respond when we see the pigs at when we're bearing witness, or we're in a situation where we're just feeling really upset because we're seeing a lot of fur, we're seeing our family eating meat in front of us. We get these bursts of adrenaline, and because we care so much and we're so passionate, that's happening all the time. And it's proven that can cause depression, living in a state of adrenaline all the time. So something that I've learned to do is to, when I feel the adrenaline rising, to be aware of it and to calm down, because that can cause burnout. And that's part of what caused my burnout, was existing in a state of adrenaline is exhausting. And most of the time we don't even know we're doing it. We're not paying attention. So if I can give any advice about that, start paying attention to your bodies and try and bring yourself down, because you'll be extending your life, literally. You'll be extending your lifespan and extending your life as an activist as well. Is adrenaline is part of extended adrenaline is a part of what makes us burn out. And speaking of adrenaline and physiological responses, and that's about energy as well, and what we're giving our energy to. And I've gone, run the gamut of what I've given my attention to in the last 15 years. When we become activists and sensitized and vegans, usually we're really, really angry at the world. And I'm still angry at the world. But there's this native saying, an elder is talking to his grandson, and he says, there's always a war going on in my mind, and it's between two wolves, and one wolf is really angry and the other wolf is really happy, and they're always warring. And the grandson says, well, who wins? And the man says, the one I feed. And I remind myself of this a lot, and I'm very angry about what's going on and how animals are treated, but I don't feed that, and I don't live in that pain, because I did burn out, and I did suffer. And I put up some healthy blocks to that, because I existed there, and it's not sustainable. It brings the adrenaline, it makes us exhausted. And so we can acknowledge in a healthy way, like there's bad blocks and there's good blocks to coping and dealing with the suffering in the world. Bad blocks, I would say, are like, oh God, that hurts, like, okay, I'm gonna go and distract myself with something else. But a good block would be, that's awful, that's disgusting, but I can't give my energy to it right now because I can't change that. This is a catastrophe, and I can't give my energy to it because that's gonna burn me out, I'm gonna be exhausted, and I can't change that. So I have a lot of barriers now, like after going to factory farms, I can't be crying my eyes out before, after, and during about what I'm seeing, though I would like to, but I put up blocks, and that's healthy, and that allows me to go forward. And some people, we could talk about that. Some people think, oh, don't block at all, like don't block the emotions. And the emotions are what propel us forward, and that's good. So I'm not saying block all the emotions, but you can always do yourself a favor and have some walls up and some blockages, and say, I'm going to be good to myself tonight, and I'm not gonna, or this week, I'm not going to live in the pain. I'm going to feed the happy wolf, and not the angry wolf. And that has allowed me to go forward, and that's allowed me to continue going forward. You guys have talked about some of the other things, so that's good. Energy, and also about energy and the anger we carry. It's hard not to be angry about all the fur and all the fur trim everywhere. And I'm angry about that too, but I actively work with myself to not focus the anger on the individuals, the person on the streetcar, my sister who still eats meat. Like I've really stepped back, and we have finite energy, and it's really, really precious. And so to focus on one individual, you know, I did that forever. My mom just kept eating, you know, how can you know all the issues? Leave that, like shanti. Just, I find that, you know, planting seeds, and I think that's a better way than like, you know, doing this, and we all kind of can't help but do that because we're so angry we want that person and that person to change. But, you know, they're on their own path, and we have to remember that. So let people be on their own path, and do yourself and your heart and your adrenaline a favor by lifting that and being less angry, actively working at being less angry, and planting seeds and living by example, and always being compassionate and kind. And like Anita said, everything should be driven from love and kindness and truth. And I'm always working at it, like always reminding myself every day, don't be angry. Your energy is finite and your energy is precious. And we have a really big mission, each of us here, that we're working on. And just focus on the big picture and not on like what grandma's eating tonight and stuff like that. It's infuriating, but if you give it the energy, you're going to deplete the energy that's more useful for big picture stuff. I want to recommend this book. This was this is the Bible as far as I'm concerned in terms of well, it's called Aftershock: Confronting Trauma in a Violent World. And it's totally dog-eared and full of notes now, and it really spoke to me. And it's written by Patrice Jones, and it's for people who are compassionate and who are frustrated and who don't know how to navigate all these feelings that we have. I've turned to this book time and time again, and I would encourage you all to pick it up. It's called Aftershock. There's another one here about not burning out. I've read bits of it, and it's very good. It's called The Lifelong Activist by Hilary Rettig. And so anyway, put those on your list if you need some resources. And again, if you have questions later, that's why I'm here.
It's amazing, spontaneous.
Go ahead.
I want to first say I agreed with everything Anita said, except for one thing, which was I think the bearing witness is deontological as utilitarian. But anyway, that's a debate. But I think
for another class.
I think everything that you said was really good, and everybody said. So first of all, I was sent this very nice statement. I'll read. That it was in relation to this class. And I don't know who wrote this, but compassion hurts when you feel connected to everything. You also feel responsible for everything. You cannot turn away. Your destiny is bound with the destinies of others. You must either learn to carry the universe or be crushed by it, which sounds a lot like things that you were saying, your good blocks. You must grow strong enough to love the world, yet empty enough to sit down at the same table with its worst horrors. And actually, Gandhi was really moved by a similar lesson from the Bhagavad Gita about the lesson of Arjuna, because he was about to enter into battle and he felt conflicted over it, and Arjuna, Krishna advised him to say, essentially be in the world but not of it, and also to not be attached to the fruits of your the fruits of your actions. So don't think about the consequences. Just do what's right. Essentially, Gandhi found that very profound. And that kind of is a good segue into what I wanted to say here. And you can come off for some time. But anyway, first of all, the activist guilt. A lot of people feel they're not doing enough for the animals. And but then, and they're conflicted because there's a principle that an activist will necessarily feel, which is act as if the fate of the whole world depended on your actions constantly. And that brings up the problem of under-witnessing. Of course, we all have responsibility, freedom, as was said earlier. We have the responsibility to be their voice, and they don't. So that huge crushing burden. But at the same time, it has to be held in check, like the good blocks. And the way I've expressed it is you have to take time out from activism, either in daily life or even a long period stretch, to do reflection. And this reflection is a common theme for the peace activists as well. They take time, they actually say, okay, I'm going to take this number of months off to do reflection. Or monastics do that as well. But you can do reflection every day. and renewal every day, like somebody mentioned love, well, it can be very, love can be just like hugging your dog. So Buddy and I have a good hug every day, and that reminds me. Or you can hug another primate, that's good too. And that's renewing. I do think it's important to identify as an activist. Think of yourself as a lifelong animal rights activist and a calling. It's a sacred mission, it's a calling. So that means, since it's your calling, you can take time out and you'll come back to it later. And it's not like it's going to go away. Wherever you go, it's going to be there. Another issue, when I burn out before, I've been in like 5 social justice movements. Now, when I burn out, it's been over factionalism and disappointment. Carolyn talked about earlier. And definitely, you'll always feel there will be always people that rub you the wrong way in the movement. Always. Although I would add, the animal rights movement is less that way than others.
Really?
That I've been in. Yeah. The housing movement. Anyway, anyway. So it's, this is a great movement. This is like very supportive and wonderful by comparison to some stuff.
Okay.
So yeah, and as a result, I've spent a lot of years as what I would call a lone activist, because I didn't have a sense of community, but I did it anyway because it's my calling. It's what who I am, or what I'm called to do in life, and more than important than anything, right? And whether if it's your calling, you do it. Whether or not you have a supportive community, but it really is nice when there is one, of course. There are also recognize there's many AR movements, not just one. So pick the one that fits you best, and it often takes time, even years, to find the group, the movement, the sub-movement within the movement. Or the peoples. Now, luckily, I met Anita and Agnes and others, and Ian Purdy, who now that's my movement, and it's the nonviolent movement. It's the movement that involves reflection and insight. It's the movement that involves bearing witness, and I feel strongly about that. Also, pace yourself and find your niche. Somebody mentioned the word niche before. That's very important. I remember a guy, I'm not going to say names, but he came into the movement, he was like full of anger, full of passion, really great stuff. We did a lot of stuff together. And then he was like quit inexplicably and disappeared. I'm like, what happened to this guy, right? He was around for 1 year or something. Well, obviously that's not the way to do it. You pace yourself, and you don't expect immediate results. You mentioned an Aboriginal lesson. Another one that I've heard, and you might have heard, is real change takes 7 generations, right? So if you're in a war and you're a soldier, you think that you're going to actually defeat the entire enemy in one go, in one battle? No, you're part of a larger effort. And so you've got to recognize that. Not to, sorry for the militaristic analogy, but so it does require balance with personal life, and I don't feel guilty about giving time to my personal life. I used to, but I don't anymore because as a lot of you have said, if I don't do that, then I can be like that guy, and that's a tendency in me, is to go all out, 16 hours a day, everything. You don't sleep, you don't bathe, and you're just like all, and then you're actually viewed as a crazy person, and you're not effective at all. But so I'd say even if you give half an hour a day to the animals, and that's not a lot, but if you give half an hour, that's good. And does Facebook count? That's a big question. I think it does if you're converting people on it and you're sharing petitions and you're adding important thoughts. It does count. It's been actually very beneficial to the movement. So another issue is the burden of this knowledge is causes suffering on the person. Put that into context, though. That's a problem. It's some people call it the Odyssey problem, like the problem of evil in the world. It predates animal rights activism, and it's impossible for you or you to solve it. You will short circuit. To use this, if you're like an Android analogy, if you try to solve that problem, you cannot solve it. There are a lot of philosophers who tried to salt. So you put it aside. You put the good block on it. I love that. And also with the growing community, it does become possible. So you have to have somebody use the word faith, like Carolyn did. Faith is a great word here. Faith is belief in something unseen, and the unseen is the positive end that we seek. And you have to have faith in it, or else it won't happen. And if you don't have faith in it, it certainly won't happen. And it does happen in little ways that you have to look for and be attuned to when we have a God-positive talk with a slaughterhouse worker, when somebody becomes a vegan, if I convince my department to use vegan ice cream instead of real ice cream. Little things like that do make a difference. And it's surprising, if you're attuned to the little things, how encouraging they can be. So you have to set aside that huge question, the billions suffering, like Brenda said, and you have to focus on what is positive and take heart from that. And it is an endless process. 3 minutes, yeah. So, I want to talk about another philosophical word. You mentioned deontology. The one I like is non-consequentialism, which is the same thing. Let me put it this way. The way we live, like Tolstoy said, how we live is as important as the end result, maybe even more. So there's a moral imperative to avoid defeatism and pessimism, and a moral duty to be optimists, not wishful thinkers. And there's a difference between that. I think one of the things that I try to avoid is sectarianism, factionalism, fundamentalism, insularism, all big words for thinking that you're always right and everybody is always wrong, and trying to bridge with other movements and other people, and also deepening the insight within the movement. Having a faith that positive change is a long-term project. It will extend beyond the life of any single person, but you're part of it. Just like the civil rights movement, they had to have that faith for that to succeed. Every effort counts. Signing a petition counts. It doesn't not count, because again, Kant, the philosophy of the goodwill, it's even if you could never act on your goodwill, it still matters. I always told that to my 90-year-old grandmother, who in the end of her life, because she said, I'm useless, I'm no good. And I said, no, you have a beautiful soul, you're a wonderful person, and you've done so much in your life, and that matters. And the fact that you still want to do good matters. And that it does, even if nobody else recognizes it, but I recognize it. And so we all die eventually. The world will die eventually, sooner or later. And what matters is how we live, not how long. Imagine yourself in a death camp. This is a harsh analogy, but everybody will die. Does it matter what the person does in the death camp? Yes. It does matter if they treat others kindly, even if nobody gets out alive. It matters not to be what is called the Sonder Commando, the ones who facilitated it, and because they betrayed their own souls. What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his soul? That's in the New Testament. I love that one. So signing a petition, it matters. Whatever the outcome, because you're doing it with the good soul, the good heart, the good will, right? Jesus had an analogy, the widow's mite. She gave more by giving the little that she had than the rich man who gave the little. He gave more money, but not with the goodwill. She gave it with the goodwill. That matters. That meant more to God. Would you be a vegan even if no one else in the world was? I would, because it matters what I do, whatever the world does. All right. So the other. Let's see. Many activists neglect themselves. I've done that. Exercise. That's practical. Take time to do that. Think of yourself as an animal who's in need. Would you deny a dog the exercise that they need every day? If you don't exercise and renew yourself spiritually, you're like abusing a dog, and the dog is you. That's animal abuse. That's very bad. So your actions matter, no matter how small, and it is an endless process. I also, one last point, I always look for new ways to express it, to use my creativity, because faith is the act of the total person, the physical self, the emotional self, the intellectual self. I always look for these new creative ways to do it. So recently I found the posters on Facebook thing. I got Photoshop and do that. And then I'll do something else later. And the new ways of doing activism really is fun. And I enjoy that. So those are a few tips. Yeah.
Did the philosophy of bearing witness, I mean, was it immediate or was it, like, was where you are now? Because the ideology actually seems quite cohesive at this point, but it didn't start out that way. So, I don't want you, I know it's probably too complicated to chart the route, but were there milestones along the way that led you to where you are?
Yeah, there are many milestones. Like, I think when we first started, we just knew we had to gather footage, and we had art shows, and you were part of that, and we had monthly potlucks. And then PETA did a human meat trade, and I had gone to Lakeshore and Strawn to take some footage because I was doing a video for Rabble, and then that was the first time I bore witness in a truck, and I couldn't believe it. It was like just so profound. I promised that day that I would do like 3 vigils, a minimum of 3 vigils a week to the pigs, and bearing witness is such a huge and powerful strategy that it takes years. I think it takes years to get it. I mean, Joanne knows, doing it for a decade, but I think it takes a long time to even get what all the implications of bearing witness are. And I think what's distinctive about our group is that it's a very democratic approach where we say collectively bear witness. And all of us, every single person has a duty to bear witness, and it's not something for just investigators and we all have to bear first-hand witness of the animals and the individuals before us. And to me, that the figure, like 700 million animals, I think, yes, let's tackle that figure. That's what I like about it. Let's tackle that figure. What does it mean? Let's break it down. So quality meat packers is, 1.5 million pigs a year. It's 6, Louise put on the poster, 7,000 or 6,000 pigs a week. Yeah, let's tackle it. Each truck, 210. We're witnessing what? Let's add it up. This is what it means. I think we have a responsibility to tackle those numbers, break them down. And so bearing witness is all these things. And it's such a huge strategy that you could write, I believe, books on. And I mean, other movements have used this strategy. Quakers, they got a sailboat called the Golden Rule in the 1950s and tried to sail. They didn't make it, but they tried to sail in the South Pacific. Later, Greenpeace was successful and tried to bear witness and go to ground zero where the nuclear tests were being conducted. And bearing witness was done by Martin Luther King, and it has different forms. So in his case, he chose Birmingham after the bus boycott was in. Was in where? Sorry.
Was it Montgomery?
Montgomery, right? The Montgomery bus boycott. Then the next site he chose for action was Birmingham because that was the place where there was the greatest number of church burnings and murders, and it was. Bull O'Connor was the police chief, and it was very aggressive. And so they chose that site because there was so much violence, and it's important to go to the site of greatest injustice. And that's why when we bear witness, we go to slaughterhouses because that's the greatest site of injustice. And then after he achieved the Voting Act in 1965, then he went to live in the slum areas of Chicago because there was all this housing discrimination. And so he took his whole family to live there, and there was no front door, and homeless people would pee in the hallways. And he took his whole family to live there, even though he came from a middle class family. So that's an example of bearing witness. And the way we applied it to Toronto Cow Save is we did a 30-hour vigil where we actually slept overnight at the slaughterhouse. That felt like real solidarity.
That was good. That was good.
Yeah, we were sleeping there. It was like it felt and it smelled terribly, and we were just experiencing a small portion of what the cows experience in the pens that night. And so when we do more and more solidarity and deeper bearing witness, that's why I said bearing witness, it can be partial. And when we're at Pig Island, it's a partial form, but it can be fuller. And that involves more sacrifice, way more sacrifice. And if we were in those trucks, we would want way more sacrifice from other people. There's almost no consequences for us. It's not like we're resisting, the fascists or the Nazis, and if we resist, we're going to be shot or hung. we face almost no consequences. In fact, we get, oh great, you're doing a great job, that's what we get. And are we doing a great job? We try. Minor problems that we face, but by and large, we live an incredibly privileged life, and we can do a lot more. And we don't sacrifice a lot.
It sounds like it's evolving. It's still evolving.
Oh, it's such a big, bearing witness is such a huge concept.
It's becoming worldwide now. It's another continent.
But isn't that an emotional sacrifice to some extent? Like for myself, it took me a long time to come out to the very first vigil. I knew about, I've been in touch with you and other members of the vigil group, and I've even written in the group, I will come one day, I just can't do it right now. And so I think it's a matter of people being able to come to terms with what they are witnessing and how it will affect them, especially the first time. And I think that's probably the thing that's the most fearsome for people, is to be able to, how are you going to react and deal with it? And even though it's very important to be there to witness, but to be able to deal with it emotionally is an impact. And I think once you overcome that, you can move on. That's how it was for me anyway.
Yeah, question for Joanne. Because you talked about you've been different places, and you've been directly bearing witness, similar to you see the trucks, but you've been in slaughterhouses, all the various things, and then it's documented in The Animals, the book, Ghosts in Our Machine. And I was thinking about the actor who's passed away now, who acted in The Killing Fields. And he was a doctor. He wasn't even an actor by profession. He was a doctor. And he was Cambodian, and he acted in the film, and he couldn't see the film because the film was like reliving what he had. And so I guess I'm wondering, does it feel like you relive it when you see, because they're your photos, it's literally your eyes, right? And when I see things, it's horrible enough when I see things on the net, but I actually wasn't the one taking that. Usually I'm not the one taking that photo. So how do you deal with that kind of?
It's a lot.
Yeah.
But that goes back to healthy blocks as well.
Right.
It's not only am I shooting the pictures and meeting hundreds of thousands of animals and leaving them behind, but that's my job every day, is that I'm working with my own archive of 10 years every single day. So I don't, and this shouldn't go for everyone, but for me, about healthy barriers, I don't look at new footage that's coming out all the time unless I read about it and I see that I'm going to learn something new from it. So I try and limit my amount, and also look but not feel, like look in an educational way.
Like when you see your own stuff, does it not take you back to?
Sometimes.
But you're able
But then I, like I said, I'm always working on choosing and not just following where my head wants to go or where the anger wants to go. It's a constant choosing of this sucks, or I have to look at this right now, but I'm not going to go into it with my heart and my anger and dwell there. So over and over, every day, I'm choosing to put up some healthy barriers so that I can have more energy for the work I need to do. But that probably took a while. Yeah. I think I had to go through depression and learn some skills for looking after myself. And when we get into negative thinking, which is easy with all the bearing witness that we're doing, it's like a rut, like our mind's going through ruts as well, and you can just start thinking about things all the time, like the people that we're having dramas with in our lifetimes, our mothers, our best friends, whatever, we just think about it all the time. We get into these ruts, so you have to think about what you're thinking about, yeah, and observe what you're thinking about, and always choosing to not think about that, and it's active, it's very proactive. And also physiological stuff, being healthy. And how I got over depression was really, really simple stuff, and people don't want to know that it's this simple, but it sort of was for me. I had some tools, but also you just have to admit that you need sleep and you need to take your vitamins, and by vitamins I mean either like actual vitamins or really, really healthy food. Like, don't be a self-animal abuser. Our bodies need certain things in order to go forward. And like, you can't get out of thinking about awful things if you're underslept. especially if you're underslept. So really, really basic things, drinking enough water. I mean, geez, that's almost too easy. But it really, those things will like help you get ahead of how you're feeling and give you like tools.
Just one thing that's not been mentioned is supporting, say, the big national organisations if you don't think that you're being effective as an individual. You can support people like Mercy for Animals or TBA or the Association of Fur Defenders, even small monthly donations if you can afford it. So then if you personally can't do anything enough, then at least you can think that a little bit of your money is doing something.
I have a question for Brenda. So one aspect of your situation that's unique is that you form relationships with a lot of animals, especially emotional bonds, and then these animals may die or might become sick. And so I'm wondering about how you handle that piece of the road that you're on.
Well, we just lost Wally, one of our beloved pot-bellied pigs. It was very painful. But he came in horrific. He just came from a terrible situation. He looked, his skin was hanging off, his nails were so long he couldn't stumble. He was stumbling around, he could barely walk. His sight was half gone. I don't know what was wrong with his eyes. But he came around and he developed this little trot. It was just sort of his little wally walk around the paddock, and we really loved him. And we were there, of course, with him when we had the vet come. We had to make the decision. It was a gift that we could give him. He was suffering, and so we could choose that for our animals, right? That we can't choose for our people. But we know that for the year and a half that he was with us, he knew love, he blossomed, and we did everything that we could. And that's all. We know that whatever we're doing for our animal family is what we can, and that they, as short as it may be, or God willing, as long as it will be, that they will have known nothing but love and care. And that assuages any, we want to develop a memorial garden. We want to create a nice space because each one obviously brings their own color and character to the place, and our family wouldn't be the same without each individual. It's not like we have sheep. Like there's not a flock of sheep. There's Matry and Smudge and Freckles. I mean, each they're individuals, and they all have their own personalities, and they're treated as such. And we benefit by that.
I think the idea of a memorial garden is
We had a terrible infection. We don't know what the cause of it was, but just wasting away.
yes.
A number of people mentioned spirituality. I was just wondering, just kind of referenced it in passing, but I was wondering if anybody, for any analysts, whether that's an important part of your health is having a spiritual life.
Me.
Yeah.
And of course, spirituality has different faces, but I would have the same as you, that's for sure. Rob is my husband.
So you had to say that.
Yeah, that's right.
You set her up.
No, actually, I didn't, but I was actually
rest,
just surprised how many times that
yes.
people reference, or sometimes it's just referencing Jesus, but
Yeah.
I was wondering if for other people is that.
It's a figure, but also.
Yeah.
And Paul quoted
Yeah, I think I'm an atheist, but I think even Tolstoy was in a way, and what he was attracted to was something that lives forever, which I think is love and truth. So I'm not sure what that means, but I believe I actually see those forces. Like I see those forces in my dog, Mr. B, which I got from my mom. I actually see part of her in him, and I know the kindness that my mother showed me actually lives on all the time. And I also often think of her when I'm low and try to get her energy. And so I think those kind of forces live forever. And whether that's God, I mean, that's what Tolstoy said. He said, God is love. So maybe that's how I understand it.
It sounds like, and I think Brenda talked to reference to reincarnation about talking about yourself. I don't know whether that was just a metaphor or whether you actually believed it.
No, I don't know. I can't prove that it doesn't exist, so it certainly is possible. But I do believe, fundamentally, I mean, in our logo on the Mission Well Sanctuary, it says in connection with all. And that's not an intellectual exercise, that's something that I profoundly believe, that we're all connected. And that, so we are part of something much larger than any one of us individually. So us together, plus, you know, whatever is out there, that we're all energy. So it is, and we all, I think, in some ways talked about faith. So faith in something greater than ourselves, which is spirituality. So yeah, I would not say religious, but spiritual.
In fact, I think every single person referenced faith or the Bible or Jesus, which is, I found really fascinating.
Huh.
Well, I say that animal rights and morality is, and social justice, that is my religion. And insofar as traditional religions go along in that direction towards morality, I agree with them. And where they deviate from that, I disagree with them. Because that's the standard by which I assess those traditions. And it's a very high standard, right? It's the highest standard of all. And it's actually, you know, if you look at Paul Tillich or his work, you know, faith is ultimate concern, and that involves the entire person, their mind, their body, their soul, everything, their mind, their intellect, and moral faith is one of the highest expressions of it. There's many types of faith that are idolatrous, but moral faith is the highest, if not one of the highest, if not the highest. It's the one that speaks to me. You know, the Hindus have the three. They have the Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. Bhakti Yoga is love. Karma Yoga is action, and Jnana Yoga is using your mind to discover the truth. And you know, I'd say a good animal rights activist uses all three: their heart, their mind, and their action, their body, and that involves the whole person. And there's many ways of doing it. So I grew up in the United Church, and but I wouldn't say that I wouldn't identify as a Christian in the same way that I understood that anymore. What I would say is that I look up to Jesus' teachings as a great example of moral faith that I truly believe in, and I think it's the most important thing. And you know, from other traditions as well. It's a big topic you opened up there. I teach a whole course on it, so I'm not going to yeah, so we're not going to get into all of it, but it is, I would say, and I tell the students too, this is my religion. So I'm pretty upfront about that. This is my complete conviction, you know, in life.
The family question. How do we deal with our family? I'm just thinking, I have a godmother who's in a nursing home in Australia, 20,000 kilometers away, and there's a rabid Christian, like rabid. You can't, every second word is whatever, you know. And over 5 years, I've got her to address the topic of animals, but it's glacial movement. She's in her early 90s now. But our job isn't to, you know, be messianic with every family member, but every one of us has a family, and this issue is pretty much on our T-shirt all the time. How do you have any tips for how each of you deal with it, and without being too personal?
Yes, my husband and I separated.
That story.
It was an issue. It became a larger. The divide grew over time.
Can a vegan live with a non-vegan? And I know couples that won't marry if they don't settle that question. And they're couples that
But you can pick those people.
Very individual.
You can pick those people, but you can't pick your great aunt.
Yes.
Right, exactly. Good point.
And so, for me, I don't worry about it. And I spent a lot of time worrying about what my family ate, and now I've chosen recently in the last 2 years just to not worry about what they eat. And then focus on planting the seeds of change generally in my life instead of those 5 people, that kind of thing. Because it just takes up too much energy.
It's also a form of adaptation. It's also a form of adaptation for you.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
it took a while for me to adapt and to relax. I don't think that's what you mean though.
Well, you know, you have to adapt to your environment. Like you said, you keep saying if you want to keep your energy for something that is purposeful, you have to choose, right? So,
I have a question for you. What is your goal? Why, what is it, what's your purpose in,
Like why her?
yeah, well, I'm just wondering why you brought, is that just as an example?
It's just an example, but the question is, there's a certain, Paul says like the moral duty, or several of you said the moral
Right.
duty.
Right.
And these are our genetic
But
and
not
legal
to,
relatives.
I don't
you
think
know.
we have moral duty to proselytize.
I agree, but they know we exist, and we know they exist. We know what they eat. We know what we feel, and that's an instant. You can't not have the dialogue. That's why I'm asking the question. So
Right, I would
each of
say you
us
have
had
the
that.
dialogue, but you can agree to disagree.
Oh,
If you
absolutely.
feel like you've had a complete dialogue and continue doing what you feel is right.
I would think you do have a duty. I think you have a duty to change absolutely everybody, particularly people that are close to you and your friends. So I actually think there's a positive duty that we have. I mean, if we were living in the context of a human genocide, and they participated in rape and murder, then it would be a different picture. There's incredible speciesism, and it's hard to avoid it because there's so much animal abuse in the world. It's so predominant, it's that we're living in the middle of it, so it's hard to sometimes see it. So actually, I totally agree with you. I think that, you know, in the case of my mother, she actually made fun of me for 10 years when I was vegetarian. And I always loved my mother. She was really close, but for some reason, anyways, she got breast cancer 12, 13 years ago, and then I did a lot of the shopping and stuff like that, and she went vegetarian and then vegan. And it was partly also because I did all the shopping and cooking. but she changed as a person, and she was more committed to animals. And I talked to everybody, my neighbors, the reason I brought the case of my mother up is that it might look impossible for people to change. They might make fun of you. They might not want to hear you. But keep on planting seeds, and it's up to you to be innovative in how you do it. So try different methods. You know, and all love-based works better, like films. You know, vegan food. Bring food. You know, I don't see the point of boycotting Thanksgiving. Like, go there and bring a beautiful vegan dish. Like, just keep at it. Just keep at it, because they're part of your life, and animal rights is absolutely fundamentally important. So you got to always have it there with you, but do it in a nice way. And you got to, and it's not responsible to say, well, I'm not going to deal with it, but not in a way that hurts you. Do it in a if you do something with a love-based way, it won't hurt you. When you talk, it actually won't. So that's why love-based is so important.
I'm pretty lucky in this because one of my brothers, my mother, and 2 of my sisters went either vegan or vegetarian. And the weird thing is, I don't recall talking to them about it, but they knew where I stood, and I think that influenced them, just the example. So if you, my brother made fun of it in the first couple of years, and then he was the one that shocked me. Well, he's not a full vegetarian, but he cut out, I think, chicken, cows, and things like that, and it just shocked me because I just never expected him. But when my sister became a vegan, I expected that, but not him. And my mother became vegetarian. I didn't expect that. So, and there's this one day they said, guess what? And that really, but it took like 10 years or something. It was a bit of a process for them to come around. But I don't recall ever actually pushing them on it. And but I made my views known, but I didn't say you should or something. So there's a difference.
I think it's a really important question for new vegans, because I think people think it's like what do you eat and but it's not. It's particularly youth and so for the kids, because we have an 8-year-old and 12-year-old and we got their website. So 12-year-old is always getting into discussions with her friends because she's a vegan and everybody and And they're not very rational kind of, well, I don't think adults have rational ones either, so, they can be really difficult, but she'll have kids come up and say, I want to be vegan, and of course they also have very little voice. So it's a very different world. They can't do the 30-day vegan challenge because they don't buy the groceries, they don't have the money, they don't make their meals. And so we've been talking about what a difference it is because most of what we have out there is for adults. So as adults, we can kind of go, you know what, Mom, I'm not going to see you as often. But when you're living in Mom's house, it's a very different world. And so, and some of them giving up because, they just, they still want to eat. They don't really know how to work it. So I think it's a really valid, like when we're talking to people and youth, and we get past that initial stage of them realizing and them wanting to be vegan, the support they might need is that answering that very question. Like, how do I remain friends? Like, I remember Shimmy saying to me, I'm going to lose friends, right? I feel like I'm going to lose friends. Like, I feel like, and I said, I hope you don't. You might. I think I have. Like, I'm almost sure I have. He said not to worry about it, so I don't worry about it. But, they have the exact same issues as adults. They're smaller, but they're the exact same. Rowan goes to a birthday party, and we call him our conscience, because, you find those people in the world that somehow have, I don't know, is it a moral bar or strength? And he'll go to a birthday party and come back and say he had a great time to play laser tag, and I'll say, what did you eat? And he'll say nothing. Because they had pizza and they had cake. And then he'll be very happy, ask if he can have some vegan ice cream, and he's unbothered because there's some bubble that he has to get there. So, we look at that and say, okay, this kid, we got to use him. Right? And so I think that...
This is your kid? Or?
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Actually, do you want to share the website?
Yeah.
I don't know if everyone knows that.
Their website is...
made a website for children.
For children, yeah. It's a vegan website for kids. For kids, by kids. Anita's
what you raised is, I think, important. It's the difficulty that some children may face, and I think that's a more important issue than what we might face. It's actually got to the point where some people take their kids they do homeschooling. We had a panel on that last year, because they don't really want those kids to be subjected to that unfortunate peer pressure. And I know I've heard stories about kids who felt alone, who chose to do this from an early age, and themselves, not even their parents, and the amount of pressure that must have been on them is great. So you raised an important point.
I think the positive thing about that is that a movement that may have been predominantly adults initially, is now young families. And so I've been asked by 2 or 3 mothers, can you write something, not about recipes and stuff, like, we don't want recipes. What we want to know is how to deal with the teacher who whatever, right? Because we're kind of a tough family, I think, in some ways. So, I've done the letter to the teacher, really nice, very loving letter, saying, when you read a book like Little House on the Mountain or whatever it is, one of the Little House books, and they talk about killing the pig, it's a grade 3 class, and then taking the bladder and making it a balloon as a toy, because that's what she wrote, that's what Laura Ingalls wrote. And then the teacher says, when one of the kids says, the teacher says, well, don't you love bacon? Knowing that Rohan's in the class, right? Then there's some education. I mean, personally, what you want to do is you just want to do something. But instead, you write a letter, right? And it was great for me.
An adrenaline fuel letter.
Yeah, that you throw out, and then you write the second one. Where you kind of compare, what did we do? We compared it to, if there was a book where kittens and puppies were skinned and cut up, it might upset some of the other kids in the class. So if you could just think of it in that light, plus there could be Muslim, and I threw in all sorts of things. There could be Muslim kids in the class, there could be other people there where this would be a horrific thing, and very nice, and I'm sure you didn't mean to, and I'm sure, this is a new idea for you, and Rowan didn't complain, put that in there, because he didn't. He just kind of came home and said, it was depressing. It was depressing for him. The actual story was depressing, and he loves the book. So I mean, where I'm going with that is I think I think there's more to it now, and maybe it's a really positive thing. That there's so many people raising vegan children, that there's so many toddlers who are vegan that wasn't before, and maybe that's a hope.
So, Rafa, what did the teacher say?
The teacher saw Brian and Anita, like he came up to you, didn't he?
Yeah.
Did he?
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
That was it?
And I mean, when he took Rowan aside and said, and I think what he basically got, I don't think he changed. I think a little flag went up that, oh, maybe I need to think these things through a little bit, right?
But in his church.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it was a lesson for him, but it was great. Look, I took all the identifying information out, and so applying like that's a letter that you can pass on to. Not that they're going to copy the letter, but for parents out there, you know, because you know it's hard for all of us, right? And everybody wants to write the first letter that I wrote, right? You know, but
Can't we see that one?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it just when you pointed out that most of the information that's out there about veganism is directed at adults, and there should be more directed at children. Like that made me wonder why there isn't more directed at children, because the way I see it, I think that like children would more naturally want to be vegetarians or vegans because at that age they haven't been socialized to see animals as objects and relate to them as such, and I just like I think most children like would be if they hadn't been socialized to see animals as certain animals as objects and like a child wouldn't notice like why that pig is different from if it was a kitten or a puppy having its throat slit and being put on a stick, and yeah, and
I think it's the parents. You have to get parents on board before they let you. It's a barrier. The parents are a barrier.
Yeah, but I think like even if the parents are a barrier, I think that like children see animals as their friends. Like when I've always loved animals, and like when I was little, like I always saw animals as my friends, and like didn't understand like why you'd see an animal as different. And I had been raised to eat meat, like we ate meat all the time, and yeah, and it's I think that like when most children like find out like what actually happens to the animals that are turned into meat, and like where meat really comes from, like they like kick and scream instead of eating that stuff.
Just say something about that at the sanctuary. We have a lot of kids that come up and they get to meet the animals. And we had one great experience with a boy who, as we were getting to know each other, said his favorite food was bacon. And we didn't say anything. We went on to the next child, and we were just getting to know each other. But he fell in love with one of our pigs. And he came up to me and said, "I will never eat another thing from a pig again." He made the connection because he was there and he looked into the pig's eyes. He had interaction with. That's why it's so important, I think, for them to get to know the animals as individuals.
Yeah, and I think when we interact with animals like that, like a lot of us have been socialized to see as food. Like I think that really does it for people. Like even when people like who have had like pigs as pets and chickens as pets, and like they like when they start like getting to know their pet as an individual, like they stop like wanting to eat that animal. They kind of make the connection. It's like even if they have been raised to eat meat, they don't want to eat that anymore.
There's all human rights philosophies like sort of based on individuals.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
doing the same
very much
things. True for animals.
I think there's a couple people in the back sorry.
I was wondering about Paul, about you. You've been mentioning something about Arjuna, that you have to go to war if you do the right thing.
Yeah, and somebody at the break said I shouldn't have used a military analogy, but I'm just going to say that, and I agree with that because I'm against war and militarism.
Turn the other cheek, it's confusing.
But I'll just say that Gandhi's interpretation of that particular scripture was a non-violent interpretation. So he viewed war, he was using war in the way that I'm using it, not to refer to a real war, but to refer to the spiritual battle that we're all engaged in this, and that's how it's meant.
That's how it's meant to be.
Exactly. So, and he was very definite about that interpretation because it has been misinterpreted in the past to refer to war, to excuse, to justify war when it's actually could be used, it should be used as an argument for nonviolence. And the point was to not be attached to the fruits of your labors, meaning don't think about here in this context, don't think about the billions and whether you can save them or not. Just do what you know to be right in the meantime. I don't know if I answered that. It's good enough.
A little bit confused.
Well,
it's like mixed metaphors.
Not, I mean, this is not a class on nonviolent philosophy. We'll do another one on that. But it's a deep issue.
You got a question?
Yeah, just about what you guys were saying about the socialization. There's actually a study that was done recently at the University of Chicago. It actually took rats. It was similar to the study Paul mentioned last year, where they held one rat was captive and they had another rat saving it. And what's not interesting about that is, I mean, we all know that animals have it, but what's interesting about it is that they didn't have empathy for rats kinds of rats that they weren't raised with. And it just goes to show that all empathy comes from socialization as opposed to any rational argument. So that what you guys are talking about,
I can agree with that, because empathy is something you need to instill, I think, in someone. My son was brought up with a deep sense of empathy, and for through his teenage years, he always said to me, "Mom, I don't see the point of you having taught me empathy. It's not doing me any good." But now that he's 24, he definitely sees the reasons for empathy and the influence that I've had on him as far as the connection to the earth and how we're all interconnected, and how whatever decisions he makes in his life today can affect numerous people or life forms tomorrow. So empathy is definitely something that needs to be taught, and that is something that is lacking. We are in an apathetic world, unfortunately, and I think that is the biggest barrier that we face as any type of activist, is that apathetic viewpoint, in my opinion. This is always my opinion.
I would say that's highly controversial. So there might be one experiment that says that. There's a book called, Conrad Lawrence wrote a book called On Aggression. He came up with certain theories and findings. So there's a lot of different theories of what human nature is and what's instinctual. You know, you can have one experiment that shows this, but experiments by design are very reductionist, not necessarily holistic. And you had an interesting thread where, yeah, he was making the case that some of our instincts are to be compassionate and empathetic and things like that. So there are different schools of thought on this issue, because it's such a big issue to say what human nature is and what are our instincts.
You know, it's a great conversation. I think we'll have to end now.